Don't Step on the Cracks by Christine Lawrence. Chapter 1. Josie. This old bakery was where she used to go with her mum when she was a kid. She remembered the smell of newly baked bread and the taste of iced buns, her favourite. Just sitting there in the dark, sometimes she could still smell and taste the sweet sugar on the buns. Then she'd remember all that was long ago. The cold would creep into her bones and never seem to leave. It was deep in her heart and froze every good thought out of her brain. The bakery didn't smell of bread now. It smelled of piss. Not hers, someone else's. She wasn't an animal. She didn't piss in the street. The hostel room was safe, but this place was where she came when she needed excitement, to break away, to maybe earn some money that the do-gooders didn't know about. The window was cold against her back when she sat up. Behind her, the shop was empty. If you peered in through the grime, you'd see piles of unwanted mail, turned yellow with age. It had been so long since the door was opened. She'd stopped wondering why it was okay to have so many empty shops in town, so many abandoned flats behind the shops, when there were so many living in the cold and wet, or like her in a room in a hostel. A woman passed her and gave her a look of disgust. Josie glared back, sick of turning her face away. She wanted to shout at the woman's back as she walked away, but she'd always hated confrontation. That's what brought me to this place, confrontation. I should have put up with it all. Her dad had left when she was 8. She ought to be glad. Her mum was. The shouting and the bruises faded pretty quickly, but the fear stayed for a long time. She jumped every time the front door opened and jumped again when it slammed shut. There was no memory of her sitting on her dad's knee, even though her mum said she used to all the time. That must have been blocked off along with some of the other memories. She was thinking about all of this when the man came along, good-looking, dressed in jeans and a parka, carrying a Tesco bag. He smiled at her. She knew that smile always meant they wanted something. Not looking at her with disgust, but with lust. Pushing her hand through her hair, she smoothed down her miniskirt, licked her lips and leant against the glass, looking back at him, hoping for some warmth for a brief moment, hoping for some money to help get out of her head. "You want some company?" she smiled, hoping he would take her for a drink first, if only to stop her feeling the disgust she felt in herself. He said nothing, just pulled a key from his pocket, stepped closer before moving past her to the door, turning the key in the lock. She looked on as he pushed open the door, trying to keep the surprised look from her face as he stood aside and beckoned her in. "I thought we could go for a drink," she said. "You want to drink? I thought you were selling sex." His voice was harsh. Fear flickered in the pit of her belly. "Maybe it's not a good idea," Josie said, not moving away from the door. "Don't be like that," he said. "I've got some wine. We can have a drink." "Here? I meant in a pub." "I can't go in the pub with you," he said, laughing. "I mean, I would, but I'm married and people around here know me." Looking at him, she realised she had seen him before in the Red Lion. "Okay, a drink in here then," she agreed, and watched as he took a bottle of wine from the bag. She moved inside the shop, leaving the door open behind her just for safety's sake. You never knew when you might need to run. But he went and slammed the door shut and turned to her. "Upstairs," he pushed against her back. "How can I trust you?" "Well, you can't really," he replied, "but if you want paying, you'll do what I ask." "I'm not going upstairs. Just let me have some of that wine and we can do the business down here. There's no one about." "Business?" It was dark in there, but even so she noticed the veins on his neck standing out as he came closer. His eyes were as black as his hair. There was a gleam of light coming from somewhere, a street light maybe, reflecting in his stare. "Is that all this is to you? Business? You're just the same as all the rest, full of shit." His voice wasn't loud, but that made it more frightening somehow. It all felt wrong. Perhaps it was always like this, but usually she'd numbed herself first with whatever she could get her hands on. She backed away from him. "Where are you going?" He reached out to grab her, but she managed to get to the door and open it. He tripped on the papers, but instead of it slowing him down, They seemed to make him even more able to fly at her. Still with the bottle in his hand, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him swing at her head, felt the pain, and then, mercifully, everything went black.